There's something a knight from the year 1200 understood about the human mind that most men today, with all the psychology, all the science, all the self-help content in the world, still haven't figured out. It's not about strength. It's not about courage. It's something quieter, something that happens before the battle even begins. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Here's a psychological fact you're not ready to face. The reason you're not growing isn't lack of motivation, it's not lack of time, it's not lack of money. It's that you spend most of your mental energy deciding whether to do the basics. You spend the entire day negotiating with yourself. Will I work out today? Maybe. Will I wake up early tomorrow? Depends. Will I study this week? We'll see. And while you're stuck in this endless loop of deliberation, another man, with less talent than you, less intelligence than you, less potential than you, simply acts. No questioning, no negotiating, no internal drama. And at the end of the year, he's exactly where you wanted to be. That's not destiny. That's decision fatigue. And it's destroying your life in ways you don't even notice. If you made it here, you need to stay until the end. Because what I'm going to show you today is not cheap motivation. It's not the same conversation you've heard 1,000 times about discipline and willpower. It's a deep understanding of how your brain works, why it systematically sabotages you, and what the most effective men in history, from medieval knights to the great builders of the modern era, did to eliminate this problem at its root. If this content resonates with you, hit the like button now and subscribe to the channel. Not out of obligation, but because you know you need more truths like this one. Think about this for a second. You wake up in the morning. Before you've even fully opened your right eye, your brain has already started working against you. Should I get up now or 5 more minutes? Should I work out fasted or eat first? Should I answer emails first or work on the project? Should I have coffee with or without sugar? It sounds ridiculous when I list it like that, right? But that's exactly what happens. Psychologists call this ego depletion, the idea that the capacity to make good decisions is a finite resource. Every choice you make, no matter how small, burns a fraction of that reserve. And by the time you reach the decisions that truly matter, working out, studying, creating, producing, you're already running on empty. No fuel, no clarity, no mental strength to act. The problem isn't you. The problem is that nobody taught you how to protect this resource. And here's the point that's going to bother you. The men who achieve the most in this world don't have more willpower than you. They simply stopped wasting it on questions that should already have answers. Steve Jobs wore the same outfit every day. Not for style, for strategy. Every eliminated decision is energy preserved for what matters. Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of Meta, does the same thing. This isn't historical curiosity. It's an operational philosophy that separates men who build from men who only plan to build. Let's talk about your day yesterday. You may have woken up with intention. That good feeling of today is going to be different. You even mentally mapped out what you were going to do. Maybe you even wrote it down. But at some point during the day, something happened. A small hesitation, a doubt about where to start, an external stimulus that turned into a distraction, and suddenly, without clearly noticing how, the day was over. You did things, but not the things that mattered. You were busy, but you weren't productive. And the most disturbing part, you can't pinpoint exactly where you lost the thread. This has a name. It's called behavioral drift. And it happens not when you decide to stop, but when you never truly decide to start. There's a brutal difference between the man who thinks about working out and the man who works out. Between the man who wants to learn and the man who learns. Between the man who is going to change and the man who changes. And that difference isn't in the intention. It's in the system. The first man is still in a permanent cycle of evaluation, weighing pros and cons, waiting for the right time, wondering if it'll be worth it. The second man removed the question from the equation. For him, there is no whether to do it. There is only when, and most of the time, that when is now. Why do you act this way? Why do you always get stuck in this loop of hesitation? Because your brain was literally built for this. Think about the mental framework you carry. Since childhood, you were trained to evaluate before acting. That's the default model. Think before you act. Are you sure you want that? Don't be impulsive. And that model has value in situations that genuinely require reflection. But the problem is you've internalized it so deeply that you now apply this deliberative process even to actions that should already be automatic. You think before going to the gym as if it's a brand new decision. You evaluate your diet as if you've never made that choice before. You procrastinate on studying as if you need more information before you can begin. You don't. The decision has already been made. You just haven't told your nervous system yet. But this is where it gets worse. Most men who hear this will agree, maybe even feel a little relieved to have a name for the problem. Ah, it's decision fatigue. Got it. Understanding isn't enough. They'll keep doing exactly the same thing, because understanding the problem is not the same as solving the problem. And there's a very specific reason why understanding alone changes nothing. A reason that goes straight to the core of how your brain was programmed through years and years of repeated behavior. Don't leave now, because if you do, you'll miss exactly the part that changes everything. Let's talk about habits, not in the shallow way you've already heard, but the way it actually works inside your brain's architecture. There's a structure in your nervous system called the basal ganglia, a primitive and powerful region that registers behavioral patterns and converts them into automatic routines. When you repeat an action with enough frequency, this structure starts to take over. You no longer need to think consciously to act. The behavior happens with almost no effort. That's how you drive a car without thinking about every pedal. That's how you brush your teeth without concentrating on each movement. Unfortunately, the problem is that this same mechanism works for bad habits too. If you've spent years hesitating before working out, that hesitation pattern is also engraved in your basal ganglia. Your mind isn't sabotaging you out of malice. It's running the script you yourself wrote. Now think about the knights of the Middle Ages. These men didn't accept members into their orders who needed to be convinced to fight. The formation process for a knight began in childhood, sometimes at 7 years old. And it wasn't just physical training, it was the installation of a system of values and behaviors so deep that hesitation became impossible. When the moment of battle arrived, there was no internal deliberation. There was only action. The question, should I act, had been eliminated years before. All that remained was the doing. This wasn't pedagogical cruelty. It was a deep understanding of how the human mind functions under pressure. They knew, intuitively, without the neuroscience we have today, that hesitation kills. Not just in battle, in life. Modern man lost that system, not because he's less capable, but because the world he lives in no longer demands that kind of absolute commitment. No order forces you to eliminate the question. No mentor guides you through years of deliberate practice until the basics become automatic. You're alone, navigating an ocean of stimuli, notifications, options, and distractions, and hoping that your willpower will be enough to keep you on course. It won't be. It never was. And it's not your fault for not knowing this, but not anymore. Now you have no excuse. Think about how many decisions you make per day. Researchers estimate somewhere between 35,000 and 40,000 decisions per day for the average adult. Most are unconscious, but even the small conscious decisions add up to an enormous weight. And your brain, being the efficient survival system it is, starts cutting corners, starts procrastinating, starts avoiding difficult decisions by pushing them into the future. I'll start tomorrow. Next week will be better. I'll do it when I can. That's not weakness of character. It's a miscalibrated cognitive defense mechanism. The problem is that this mechanism doesn't distinguish between a decision that genuinely needs time and a decision that should have been made long ago. Psychology is clear. You don't fail because you're lazy. You fail because you let every important action become a new decision, and decisions cost energy. Energy you don't have. So what happens? You don't work out. You don't study. You don't create. You don't act, and then you punish yourself for it. You call yourself weak, undisciplined, incapable. You pile more emotional weight on top of a system that was already overloaded. And that weight, the guilt, the shame, the self-criticism, burns even more cognitive energy. It's a vicious cycle so efficient it seems impossible to escape. But it is possible. And the way out isn't to be stronger. It's to be smarter than your own brain. Here's the truth that's going to sting. You don't change because you're addicted to the version of yourself that is still deciding. That version always has an exit available. Can change tomorrow. Can start on Monday. Can restart on the 1st of the month. That version never has to face the discomfort of real effort because there's always another chance to do things differently later. And your brain, which despises discomfort and loves certainty, prefers that version. It prefers the possibility of effort to the reality of effort. As long as you're still deciding whether to do it, you don't have to face the fact that doing is hard. But there's a part that almost nobody has the courage to admit. And what comes next explains why nothing changes until today. It's not about motivation. It's not about the right day. It's not about the perfect version of the plan. It's about a truth that the men who actually build something of value in this world have understood and integrated in a way that completely transforms their relationship with action. And if you listen carefully, you'll realize you already knew this. You just never had the words for it. Let's talk about the concept of deep work, not the frantic work full of interruptions and meetings and messages, but the state of intense concentration where you actually produce something of real value. Research shows that most people can sustain a maximum of 4 hours of genuinely deep work per day. 4 hours. Not 8, not 10, not the 16 hours some gurus preach. 4 hours of real focus, without distraction, with all cognitive capacity directed at a specific task. You know what that means. It means you have an extremely limited resource, and every decision you make before you reach that work, every internal negotiation about whether you will or won't, every evaluation like, is today a good day for this, is stealing from your real bank of time and energy. The medieval knight didn't arrive at the battlefield deliberating about the day's strategy. He had trained so much, repeated so much, that his body knew what to do. His mind was free for what mattered. Reading the field, making tactical decisions, adapting to the unexpected. Cognitive capacity was preserved for the highest level of the task. That is exactly what you need to build in your own life. Not more energy, not more motivation. A system that preserves your cognitive capacity for what truly matters, eliminating from your decision-making process the questions that should have been answered long ago. And how do you build that system? Through intentional repetition. Through the creation of rituals that turn decisions into automatisms. When a behavior is repeated in the same context, with the same sequence, for long enough, it stops requiring conscious decision. You don't decide to wake up. You wake up. You don't decide to brush your teeth. You brush them. Now, imagine if working out had that same mental status. If studying had that same status. If producing, creating, doing deep work had that same level of automatism. It wouldn't be motivation driving you. It would be the system. And systems don't depend on how you're feeling. Systems work even when you're tired, even when you don't want to, even when it seems like it doesn't make a difference. There's a crucial difference between identity and intention. When you say, I'm going to try to work out more this week, you're operating at the level of intention. Fragile, circumstance-dependent, easily knocked down by the first reasonable excuse. When you say, and believe, I am a man who works out, you're operating at the level of identity. And identity is far more powerful than intention, because your brain will naturally act in ways consistent with the image you have of yourself. You don't need to convince yourself to do something that a man like you does. You simply do it, because it's part of who you are. This transition, from intention to identity, is the core of any real transformation, and it doesn't happen through a motivational speech. It happens through repeated, small, consistent actions that over time rewrite the narrative you hold about yourself. Think back to the first video on this channel about the brutal process that turned boys into men in the Middle Ages. and why that process was erased from the modern world. One of the central elements of that process was exactly this: the gradual and systematic elimination of hesitation. The boys weren't asked if they wanted to do it. They were led, and through years of being led, they internalized the behavior so deeply that the question whether to do it disappeared from their mental structure. Modern man doesn't have that process, but he can build his own. He doesn't need an external master to guide him. He needs an internal system that replaces the question with action. If this bothered you, good. It means you're finally waking up. Now here's the truth you've been running from for years. You're not lacking knowledge. You have more than enough knowledge. What you lack is a system that makes the knowledge inevitable. A system that eliminates the gap between knowing and doing. Because it's in that gap, the gap between knowing what you need to do and actually doing it, that your life is being silently consumed. Day after day. Decision after decision. Negotiation after negotiation with yourself. And while you negotiate, time passes. So how do you break this cycle? I'm going to give you something concrete. Not philosophy, not motivation. Behavioral architecture. The first principle is this: make action the path of least resistance. Your brain will always choose the easiest option, so make what you want to do easier than not doing it. Put your sneakers next to the bed. Place the book on the coffee table. Remove the entertainment app from your home screen. This isn't a trick. It's cognitive engineering. You're redesigning your environment so that the decision is eliminated before it even arises. The second principle is the 2-minute rule, but not the way you probably know it. It's not, if it takes less than 2 minutes, do it now. It's, if you want to build a habit, start with less than 2 minutes. The workout doesn't start with the full session. It starts with putting on your sneakers. Studying doesn't start with 2 hours of focus. It starts with opening the book. Writing doesn't start with 1,000 words. It starts with the first sentence. Because what you're trying to build isn't the habit of the complete action. It's the habit of starting. And once you've started, the brain naturally wants to continue. The inertia of beginning is the greatest obstacle. Once the body is in motion, continuing is infinitely easier. The third principle is the most powerful and the least practiced. Commit to the process, not the result. Most men set outcome-oriented goals. Lose 10 pounds, earn a certain amount of money, learn a language in 6 months. And the problem with outcome goals is that they create a binary state. Either you hit it or you didn't. This feeds the all-or-nothing cycle that paralyzes. When you don't achieve the expected result within the expected time frame, the tendency is to quit entirely. Now change the question. Instead of, will I achieve this result? Ask, will I follow this process today? Did I go to the gym? Yes. Did I open the book? Yes. Did I work on my priorities for 1 hour? Yes. The result will come as a consequence of consistent process, but the process is what you control, and what you control is what you build. And here we connect with something the knights understood deeply, and that was lost in the age of instant gratification. Honor was not in the outcome of the battle. It was in the commitment to the code, in fulfilling the ritual regardless of the result. The knight who trained every day wasn't thinking about winning the next battle. He was being the kind of man who trains every day. The distinction seems subtle. It's enormous. Because a man who acts through identity, who does because it's part of who he is unshakable in the face of temporary failure. Failure doesn't question his identity. It's just information about the process. But the man who only acts through the hope of a result is fragile. An obstacle paralyzes him. A failure defines him. You are building a version of yourself that doesn't need to ask whether to do it. A man who has answered that question so definitively that it no longer exists. A man who removed deliberation from the basics so he can reserve all his cognitive capacity for what truly demands reflection, creativity, and presence. This is not a one-week process. It's not an insight that transforms everything overnight. It's a reconstruction, consistent, progressive, irreversible. And it begins today, with the simplest action in the most obvious context, executed without negotiating with yourself. Before the final truth of this video, I need to ask you something. If you made it here, and few people do, it's because something in this narrative touched something real inside you. So do this now. Hit the like, subscribe to the channel, comment below what action you're going to stop negotiating starting today, and share this with another man who needs to hear it. Not because I want the numbers, but because this channel exists to build men who build real lives. And the more men who find their way here, the stronger this community will become. Now, the final truth. Here's what nobody tells you about decision fatigue. It's not just a productivity problem. It's an identity problem. Every time you negotiate with yourself about whether to do the basics, you're sending a message to your own subconscious. You're saying, "This behavior is not automatic for me. I'm still deciding who I am." And your brain believes what you repeat. If you spend years negotiating about working out, your brain learns that working out is an option, not a certainty. If you spend years negotiating about studying, it learns that studying is negotiable, not inevitable. But if you, starting today, begin treating the basics as non-negotiable, if you remove the question whether to do it from the equation and replace it with the automatism of action, something begins to shift, not just in your behavior. It shifts in the narrative you hold about who you are. And when the narrative changes, the man changes. Not the man you plan to be, the man you truly are. That is the only place where transformation happens. In the present, in action, without negotiation, now.